had to work like I didn't have a child, and I had to be a mum like I didn't work. We see a lot of people moving jobs for the culture and the environment more so than the salary.
You're totally right. The child will come first, and in a way or another, no matter the industry, the parents will find a way.
If you invest in your working parents and you invest in anybody in a care role, it's going to cost you a lot less for your business. We've created an island where middle earners who are really economically active can't survive on the island. We look at how economically active women in general are on the island while maintaining young children, and that mental load that you carry inevitably leads to burnout. So we're not really doing ourselves any favours as an island by not supporting working parents because they're so economically active on the island.
If Mentorhood is successful, how is the Jersey workforce, or how is Jersey looking in 10 years? Denise Heavey, welcome to Brands and Leaders.
Thank you very much.
So today we're going to talk about mentorhood.
Yeah.
It's something that you're really passionate about, and how this will hopefully help families moving forward. Because you have a tagline, helping families thrive. I think it was in Jersey.
Yes, and I think it's really important that we probably, remember that families need to be able to thrive. We need to be able to, we need to be in a good place, especially parents, to bring up children. So that's really important for me, that we do help families thrive on the island.
Yeah, it seems to be a conversation that's getting a lot of attention on the internet. I see it on Facebook, for example, people, families struggling, combining work with being a parent, with doing all the duties that come with, once you have a family, and it's becoming more and more difficult financially, having time for your children, spending time with them. Years back, probably just one parent had to work and the other one could focus on children. It's not the case now. You have probably two parents that are struggling to do this. So yeah, a lot changed. But when was this idea coming in mind? Because I'm sure you had a moment when you feel like, what, I kind of had enough. Let's do something about it, not just talk that, it's a difficult time or it's a difficult moment for families. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, I suppose when I had my first child, I went to IVF to have Ophelia, my eldest daughter. And I remember during that period of time, I worked in a good business, but I didn't have the confidence to speak to my employer about going through IVF, which is a really, really emotional and expensive kind of journey. And Tiny Seeds, which are a wonderful charity, weren't available at that time. And I just didn't really have any avenue to go to, but I still had to work. I had trigger shots in the fridge at work. I had to run for blood tests to the hospital. And it was a really stressful time. But I didn't have the environment or the culture in the workplace to speak to my employer. And when Ophelia came along, because I worked in hospitality and I could only take 12 weeks with her that were paid, and then I had to come back to work. So I have a 3-month-old baby with a childminder, and I had to come back to work quite quick. So I didn't take a lot of time with her because financially I couldn't afford to. And I kind of, during that period of time, I struggled a little bit through the first year of her birth. I had a bit of postnatal depression, and I think that I was still working, but I still couldn't really speak to my employer about it. And then, through support, I got through that. Through more family support, I got through that journey. And when I looked back at that time, the first year of my child life, putting my body on the line and emotionally 8-year journey to have her, I was thinking like that should have been the happiest time of my life, but it wasn't. It was the worst time of my life. And it shouldn't have been like that. But I think because I didn't have a supportive employer, it just became really difficult. So back then, I drafted in a journal a lot of ideas I had about, how can we change the culture? Because culture is so important. What support would I have needed? And I kind of sat on it because the journey to have your first child and work was quite, overwhelming, wonderful, but overwhelming. So I didn't do anything with it. And every now and again, I'd kind of look at it and think, well, I rather than complain, I suppose I'm an optimistic, positive person. I need to do something with this. So you get into your normal routine and nothing really happens. And then I had my second child. And I realised that I took a bit more time off with her and then returned back to the workplace. But similar situation, as in it was just, burnout. You were kind of working, you were trying to juggle both. and really just feeling mum guilt all the time, feeling like I couldn't really, I had to work like I didn't have a child, and I had to be a mum like I didn't work. And it wasn't sustainable. So I suppose from that point on, I decided that I did a lot of research. I spoke to a lot of parents. We did some drop-ins at the town church over a 2-day period. I spoke to, over that journey, early stages of Mentorhood before we launched the name. I spoke to hundreds of parents, grandparents, to look what the issues were and what their challenges they were facing. And then Mentorhood was born from that.
Yeah. But do you see something industry specific, or let's say certain industries, are worse than others in terms of the way they treat their employees? If let's say we were talking about hospitality, let's say is being in hospitality affecting you more, or I don't know if you have this data or if you know from experience, is working in hospitality and being a young mother affecting you more than working, let's say, in an accountancy firm? Or because you talk about culture, and sometimes, I don't know, now things probably changed a lot, but it wasn't really a very important topic in the places I work. Culture, when I work in hospitality, it was just more of like, we're here, we get the job done, we get paid, and that's pretty much it.
Well, I feel probably hospitality does get a bad rap at times, but I think that we can learn a lot from hospitality. I've run businesses in hospitality for 20 years, and I think that when I became a manager, pre-children, I didn't understand, and I probably was one of them people that would eye roll if somebody had to be, collect their child or off sick. I was one of them people until I had my own children, and then I realised that we had people that would be semi-retired who would work 3 hours a week. And then we would have people who would kind of come in and, they'd need flexible hours. They could work the morning shift, or some parents where their partner would come home at 5 and they could work the evening shift. So we created a culture where we did have, we had our part-timers were generally parents or people who were semi-retired, or somebody who wanted to work 1 day a week. We worked a lot with Back to Work. We worked with Jet. So we had such a mix, and we were very multicultural. So the model could be very much about, well, what's the job? It was job design. What's the job we need? And then look at the hours, and then look at the people. So we kind of did that approach to it. So I think hospitality, I work in recruitment now, and I find that returning parents back into the workplace, or people who want to work flexi hours, hospitality does suit that. I find a lot that sometimes the finance industry is the barrier. You'll get some great firms that will really, embrace flexibility in the workplace, will embrace a family-friendly culture. But then you'll get others that will put a stamp out there saying, we're a well-being employer, we're a family-friendly employer. But the line managers aren't trained in that aspect. So you'll have people that fall through the cracks, and then they inevitably come to us, or they'll go to other recruitment agencies and want to. Culture is important for people, and I think that we see a lot of people moving jobs for the culture and the environment more so than the salary. So I think probably finance has got a bit of work to do in relation to that.
Let's be honest, you as an employee, you also have to deliver. If let's say you're going to do only 2 hours, then those 2 hours, make sure you do deliver. It's not just like, well, I've got a child now, I should somehow be treated differently in terms of like, doing work for the company. I guess you to a degree you will be, if let's say that's the agreement, but at the same time, if you say that you're going to do those 2 hours, do those 2 hours. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, we do a lot of work with with specialists on the island, and we work with 2 HR specialists, Kylie Henley and Melanie Granfield, who are amazing, HR specialists. And we do a lot of work around, the onus on the employee. So it's not all just about the employer. Yeah. Like, small and medium-sized businesses are under a lot of pressure to try and, to run their businesses. And, it's a tough market out there. And, I think that we do a lot of work with the employee, and your obligations to ensure that, you are given that if you go off on maternity leave, that you're giving your employer enough time to make sure that it fits in with the team as well. Yeah. And remember that you are part of a team, and you have your part to play as well. Yeah. So we do a lot of work, and in our workshops, we do a lot of work around that. What a big part of the workshop is in relation to that as well.
Yeah. I think it's important to mention that, because I think the last thing we want people to understand is that what you're trying to do is almost like something against the employers, which is not the case.
Not at all.
This is actually, a happy kind of a relationship between the employee and employers. They all know their parts and they all happy.
And I don't pretend to be an expert in this area. That's why you bring in, I'm a very good networker, I'm a very good connector, and I bring in specialists. And we're working with a wonderful company in the UK called Working Families. And they've got, multiple experience. They've got employment lawyers. They've got, HR specialists that work within their team. And they are, one of the leading charities for carers in the UK. And for parents and anybody in a care role. So we use them quite a lot in relation to, understanding from an employer's point of view. I've run businesses. I understand from that point of view. But I think that, inevitably you want it to work for both. And we see what the benefits of employing parents and, nurturing them through their years. They will work hard for you, and then you will get that person that will stay with you within the company. So, and I see it all the time with recruitment and retention. The amount of money it costs to use, a recruitment agency or, do your in-house recruitment and then, training and development. If you invest in your working parents and you invest in anybody in a care role, it's going to cost you a lot less for your business.
I think, like a few days ago, I've seen that there might be some changes in terms of parental leave from 6 weeks, because I think at this point it's mandatory 6 weeks. I'm not wrong. Yeah. To 12 weeks. Is that enough? I mean, is that still a step forward? How do you see that? Because I don't know if that's going to go ahead or not, but.
Well, these are recommendations from the family-friendly legislation, and there's some fantastic recommendations in there. I think small and medium-sized businesses will really struggle with that. I think this is where government will have to play its part. And I think the recommendation is for government to take on them under 6 weeks. I think businesses a small business could not afford to, if you had just had 2 people on maternity leave. That's
the business done.
Exactly. So it doesn't work for businesses unless they get government support in relation to that. So I think that, parents need, it's so important in the first 3 years of a child's life that they're developed, 80% of their brain is formed. So it's so important, it's so vital. And I think that, people always said to me, will you advocate for working parents? And I always say, I don't. I advocate for choice. We've taken choice away from parents. We've said to mothers, you need to come back to work. For me to go back to work with my child at 12 weeks with my first child after going through an 8-year journey at IVF, because I work in an industry, that's all I really get paid for, and I need to financially work. I think, we probably need to look at that. And there is recommendations around, lower paid industries, kind of the support that they need, because you will get a lot of places like, the great employers like HSBC who are bigger businesses that can afford to really implement a lot of these family-friendly changes. But it's a struggle for the smaller and medium-sized businesses. But that's not to say they can adopt culture. I think culture is important, and I think that's what we advocate for, a change in culture and training, to add the people who are making the decisions, your line managers within these businesses, and that doesn't cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, I hear you when you're saying that, small businesses, will be affected really by these changes if these go ahead. Because you can see, I'm not sure if you've seen the article that was posted, I don't know, by Chase Evening Post or whoever on social media, and the comments there. I was kind of expecting to be a lot more positive than negative, but it's probably half, or maybe leaning more towards negative in terms of especially I say probably business owners, or what I also see is people not getting this support like years back, and now they're all frustrated because, the new generation will. And I'm like, at some point, there's got to be a change, it's just kind of continue.
But you need to look at how times have changed. Back in, when I was brought up, my mother was a stay-at-home mother, and my dad went out to work, and his wage could cover the household. And I think that it's different now. We've created an island where middle earners who are really economically active can't survive on the island. And it's cost of living, childcare costs. Like to pay, £1,800 a month for childcare is, imagine you have 2 children in a nursery. Of course it's going to break somebody eventually. And I think that we've just created this culture. So you will have a generation that say, well, back in my day, and I hear that a lot, we never had that support. And you get a lot of support now as a parent. But a lot of these people didn't need to work, or if they didn't need to work, it was because they wanted to maintain a career. It wasn't because financially they had to. And that's where I go back to choice. I think the choice is not there for parents. We're kind of saying that, for mothers in particular, you're saying that there's a lot of pressure to, be with your child, and and that mum guilt is a real thing where you kind of you're torn between wanting to spend that time with your child, especially the first few years of their life, but financially you can't afford to. So finances will always take over your decision making.
Yeah. There is something, I mean, I have a comparison to Romania because I have friends in Romania. We've got our daughter now, 15 months old, and one of my friends, he's got a daughter which is 13, and we talk about parental leave and all that. And my wife gets 12 weeks, got 12 weeks, plus she stayed for another, I don't know, it was altogether probably like 4 months at home. I can't remember exactly. But then in comparison to what they offer in Romania is there's 2 years. So they offer it 2 years, but it's not the company that pays for it. It's the government. So it's a big difference in terms of like how it's handled here and how it's handled in Romania. I'm not saying that that's the model, Jersey should follow, and I think even in terms of pay, it's close to your salary. It's close to what I can't remember your last whatever months of your salary was. So for 2 years you are set, and I'm like, that's great. Obviously they realize that there's a problem in terms of like how many births comparing to how many deaths, the population is affected. People some people left the country and all that. So they try to stimulate this. And 2 years feels like, that gives you time with your child. And as you were saying, the first 3 years are really important.
Yeah, and a lot of mothers you speak to will want to spend a period of that time with their child, and actually be comfortable to spend that time with their child without worrying about, having to maintain a job and maintain a career as well. And to transition in, to be able to, pick up to a point where you left off, but to have some kind of training or development in between that period as well as being able to spend that time with your child. And it's just not available. And I think that we look at how economically active women in general are on the islands while maintaining young children, and that mental load that you carry inevitably leads to burnout. So we're not really doing ourselves any favours as an island by not supporting working parents because they're so economically active on the island.
Yeah, I mean, look, my wife, she has quite a bit of flexibility with what she does. I've got good support with BDOC5. They're flexible. They really understand, family is, it's office, but it's also family. They understand you that, sometimes they clash and they got to give you that space. Like just last week, had my daughter with chickenpox. I talked to my manager, look, I'm going to be working from home. I've got to make this work. It's just the two of us. We can't send her to the nursery. My wife, the same. She did the same. So we split the day in terms of like I work early, she worked in the afternoon, but we were both from home. I get it, not every job can be like this. Certain jobs, you just can't do work from home, even if you want to. But it's nice seeing some change. And I think a lot of this happened since COVID in terms of, especially we're talking finance, we're talking places that, you could do work remotely without the business getting affected pretty much at all. So I think that's where change happens in a positive way. How do you see that?
Well, I think you did a really good case study for me that I didn't even need to use. And I think that the culture that men feel comfortable to ask for that time. And I think that a lot of partners of the parents that I support will say to me that their partner can't ask. If he puts in 2 hours in his diary for, an event at the Royal Yacht that will be about investments, it's ticked off. But if he puts in, HSBC ran a family-friendly event a couple of years ago, and there was one guy at the event, and the rest was all female. It was full, but it was all female. And Compare asked, the guy that was there said, like, why do you feel that you're the only person here? And he gave that example, and he said, and he worked in finance, and he said that if I put in, 2 hours, I'm going to be at an investment. Thing at the yacht, that would be approved. But because I'm doing a family-friendly thing, I get the eye rolls and the question marks in the office. So the culture is just not there for men that, don't get me wrong, in some businesses it will be.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it comes from the top down. And, a couple of my friends are directors on the island, and they've got young kids, and they lead by example. So they'll, put it in their calendar when they're going for a sports day or for a hospital appointment, or because they understand their partner works. And if they want to take away a bit of that mental strain, they have to support. It can't just be always the female going to collect the child, or the second parent to go and collect that child. And I think that the culture is really, really important, and the culture to allow men to be able to ask for that flexibility. And, a lot of flexibility for men requests get pushed back as well. There's quite high stats on that as well on the island. And I think that we need to normalise that. We need to see, CEOs speaking about, taking their children to, a ballet recital, or, going to a sports day, and blocking out in their calendar and saying this time is precious.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important. Like I'm a big rugby fan, and we've seen that, one of the really good players for the French team that we're playing against has basically said that he can't be selected because his wife's going through IVF treatment. And the media went hard on the fact that, with the headlines saying that because his wife's going through IVF treatment. But in his statement, he said, we're going through IVF treatment, because it's always seen as the woman who has the infertility issue when you don't know the situation. But that's how the media kind of portrays it. And it's you have, sports personalities that are commenting on it, saying that, like, well, why does he need to be there? And, so
I think you're seen almost like weak if you're part of that
but it affects both of you. And, and you kind of think it's such a milestone, it's such a massive, undertaking for any couple to go through. Of course, you're going to want to be there with your partner. But it's the same as the first few years as a child's life. Your partner wants to support you. And the men I speak to really want to support their partners, but the culture they work in doesn't allow that. And, they're worried about like promotions, especially if they want to make partner or they want to be developed within if you're seen, you're working hard. It's kind of like if you're visible, if you're in the office, if you're working from home, well, we don't know what you're doing. It's kind of that culture, but it worked incredibly. We had to move to that culture through COVID. And a lot of the jobs, I understand if you can't do that job, if you're working within the hospital and you need to be present, or, you need to be, customer facing. But a lot of what we can do with a hybrid model. So it's looking more at job design. And I always go back to that, like job shares are a massive thing in the UK now as well. And I think that, we're working a lot with a specialist just to try and understand that a bit more before I start kind of campaigning for that a bit more in Jersey. But I think that, we need to look at ways that we can maximize the workforce we have. We've an aging population, and we've got a younger generation coming through, Gen Z, that don't want to work the 9 to 5. I see them all the time in recruitment.
Yeah.
They want to take their hour for the gym, and they want to be able to take an hour for their lunch break. And they're all about well-being and fitness. And I think that, and they don't want to work full-time hours. And you kind of think that we've got this culture coming through that probably have it right, look after themselves, look after their well-being. And then we've got, an older population that want to stay in the workforce, that we kind of need to support to stay in the workforce as well, because some people don't want to retire at the retirement age. So when we look at job design and we look at like the soft skills that, people have over a certain age, and then we look at the younger generation that maybe have more techie skills or AI skills, and how we can kind of pair that together. So I think we just need to throw the rule book out and kind of say, right, okay, well, let's look at job designs. Let's look at, before we look at the candidate, and let's look at what the KPIs are for that job, and then look at the candidate. So we need to probably have that approach, is my view, to recruitment. And then we could probably look at flexibility as a norm, look at hybrid working as a norm, and then and let's see what happens to the economy then.
Yeah, I think you've got a very interesting insight, because being in recruitment and you hear all these stories, obviously being you are like tapped into all these conversations, and you know it from the inside out. But where should the change start? Like how are you planning to get these in a better place? Is it through conversations with, you were talking about doing something with HSBC or these bigger companies, having these meetings? Okay, I guess that's one. But are you doing something with the government as well? How are the conversations going, to moving things in the right direction?
So I'll kind of tell you a bit about Mentorhood and kind of how it's set up. So Mentorhood started with workshops, and I suppose the workshops are very based on the feedback we got from the parents and the grandparents we spoke to on the island about what the gaps in kind of support that they needed. And we found that HR support and knowledge. So I think it came out in the family-friendly legislation, and Brighter Futures alluded to the fact that a lot of people don't access the support they need because the information is in so many places, and it's quite overwhelming for people. And if you're looking after a young child, you don't have time to, you're surviving, you're in survival mode, so you don't have time to kind of look at what you're entitled to. So with the HR specialists, they looked at kind of during the maternity and paternity period what your entitlement is, and when you return back into the workplace, how to advocate for yourself and what your entitlement is, how to ask for flexibility, and how to do it in a way that is right for you and your employer. So we ran a workshop on HR in relation to all that information. Then we worked with 2 financial advisors about financial resilience. So we looked at budgeting for your family, because this is obviously quite an expensive period with a child. And it was any stage through the child's life, whether, your child is moving to secondary school or your child's starting university. So that was open to anyone that wants to come along. And we got some great tips on how to budget for your family, how to save for a rainy day, so a rainy day fund. So we had two specialists, Lloyd Adams from Concentric, and then we had Catherine Hayward from Integritas that ran that workshop. And then we used Gail Champs for confidence. So she did a workshop on confidence and, how to kind of empower yourself. And, stats are quite high on, women lose a lot of their confidence. And I see it in recruitment all the time where, we'll have the job spec and there'll be, 5 of the requirements that a woman will feel that she doesn't hit. And I can see by her CV she does. And I'll try and push her into that role. And but then we might get a gent that comes into the office and he'll have maybe, 2 of them Yale qualifications, things that will put me forward. So the confidence very much goes with women, and particularly in motherhood as well, because you're taking that time out of work. You probably feel that your skill set isn't up to the level that it needs to be. And then I did a lot of work around CV writing, LinkedIn presence, and mock interviews. So that was parents returning into work or looking to move into a different job. And then we had another workshop with Yolanda, who does tapping. So we use her quite a lot in relation to people going for an interview, anxiety, and different situations during parenthood. So she did a wonderful workshop in relation to tapping, that linked into kind of what I do at recruitment. And the last workshop we did was with Mind Jersey. So we used Louise Coxwell from Mind Jersey, and then Alice Vincenti, who runs Parent Health Hub, who's incredible knowledge in relation to basically how a woman's brain changes when she becomes a mother. And she's an occupational therapist by trade. And we looked at kind of the mental health and how to look after yourself, how to look after you and your child during that period. So we ran the first set of workshops were in relation to more empowerment and try and look at them areas that we felt there was gaps. And so we do the workshops on one side of it. So we had 50 parents that went through the workshops. And out of them 50 parents, I had 30 of them parents that I was supporting into either different roles or back into recruitment. And trying to look at people that were in kind of mid-level kind of administration roles and move them more into kind of get a promotion to get better salaries. And we work a lot with parents as well who will be working multiple jobs. And we look at whether it's a language barrier, whether they need to, do, courses for English through Highlands, or whether they need to just, get basic skills. So we try and kind of help them a little bit with that and just kind of signpost them in the right areas as well. So to try and help them to get, maintain one job so that their family life isn't that they're waiting for their partner to come home to go out and do their second cleaning job, or they're going to Waitrose or whatever they're doing for their second job. So the workshops are a big part of what we do. We've run one set of workshops, and like I said, we had 50 parents that went through that, and we're hoping to do the next set of workshops in March. But they'll be more skills based. So we're talking with Digital Jersey at the moment about putting a more spin of skills onto that as well, to look at that period when maybe someone's on maternity leave, how they can kind of keep skilled. And then when they're returning back into the workplace, they're not losing them skills that they need. A second part was I couldn't find up-to-date research on early years. And I understand the importance of early years as a whole in relation to, the wonderful nurseries that we have in Ireland and the support they have. So I spoke with Sir Mark Bollier from the Policy Centre. And he knew nothing about early years, and he said, look, I don't know anything about it. He's an incredible brain when it comes to economics and stats. So he spent a good period of time last year getting up-to-date research on early years. And we used that to kind of form a lot of the talks that we had with government in relation to the support for 2 to 3-year-olds. So his documents were obviously sent to government, and then we did a lot of work with that. And now the support is in place, and I feel we played a small part in that as well, with that support for 2 to 3-year-olds. And then the other side of it is the work we do at Working Families UK, to support businesses in ensuring that they have a family-friendly culture. So Jane Van Sale is the CEO of Working Families. She used to be the charity head of the Samaritans, and she'd worked previously for SANS, the baby loss charity. So she's loads of experience in that in the field, and she is incredibly knowledgeable on the benefits of supporting parents. And anyone who wants any information to her, she's offered to give a free assessment to anybody in Jersey who wants to have it, which normally costs a couple of £100, but she's happy to. She's coming to Jersey for an event with the IOD in June. So we've worked a lot with her to try and understand the impact, I think from more of a productivity, economic growth point of view, the impact on supporting parents. So I think we hear a lot about, it's a nice to have, it's good to do, it makes you feel good. But businesses want to know, well, how's it going to support my business? How's it going to boost productivity? And we hear that quite a lot, don't we, on Ireland? And I think that we spoke with her quite heavily on how we could work with her and introduce her into businesses to try and support businesses to understand what their culture is like, and if they're losing people, why they're losing people. So that's a big part of the work we're doing, and that leads into an event we're doing with the IOD in June. So we're trying to target it from all angles, in a sense. And, I've had some really positive response from government. I've Kirsten Morale in particular, Ina Gardner, Louise Dublé have been really fantastic in this space. And I think that, we've had some barriers as well. We probably have some politicians who probably feel, well, people just need to get on with it. Yeah. And, we have a generation of people who just manage to get on with it and they can complain as much as these people do on social media. But then you have the other side of it where people really understand that this is an issue for our island and mid-learners are really struggling and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm seeing this from two sides almost. Like, I agree that, the government shouldn't solve all our problems, but at the same time, it's in their own benefit, to keep this workforce alive. And, as you were saying about the middle class, you're totally right. People are struggling more and more. But where do you see that the next steps, from the government side should be implemented? Or what should they do next in terms of, because you talk about 2-3-year-olds, that's a really good step. Like, I know my daughter is going to the nursery. She's not benefiting yet from that, but I can see that being quite a big help in the coming years. Where do you see the government acting next that will make a really positive impact?
I want to say the support for the 2 to 3-year-olds is incredible. And I think, real credit to Rob Ward and his team for that. I think for me, it's fine for the moment, I think, but you've got a period of time where a child turns 1 and then until that child inevitably, it says 2 to 3, but really until the child is 3, you're not getting that support, doesn't kick in. So you have a period of time there where you have people who, are quite vulnerable. You know what I mean? The cost of childcare is crippling. And it's come from somebody who pays childcare. We're coming into 3 to 4 kind of preschool hours now. And the release we've had, it's really, really massively affected us. We both are mid-learners. We both work hard. We don't go on expensive holidays. We don't live lavish lifestyles. And, we've got other children as well. But to pay, your mortgage and then pay £1,800 a month and then be able to survive on this island is incredibly tough. And we're both economically active, contributing to the economy, paying our taxes, have always paid our taxes, but we don't qualify for anything. So you've kind of got a situation where mid-learners who are just over the threshold and are struggling, are potentially taking out loans, getting to the 3rd week of the month, don't have any money, one bill away from being in real trouble. Really, really struggling on the island, and we've such a high level of people who are economically active that are middle learners, and we've kind of really stretched the economy that we're in this situation, which surely some support needs to be in place for that, or it needs to be looked at in essentially. And I feel the government don't, in particular, the early years. We've got early years, you've got JAD, who are obviously the heads of early years that represent quite a lot of nurseries in the island. They have quite a strained relationship with government. So we don't have a clear roadmap for our early years on the island. We don't have, a 10-year roadmap where, regardless of what government goes in, this is what this is going to look like, and this doesn't change because this is infrastructure on our island. Because inevitably, care is infrastructure. It has to, be supported, and it has to be supported by government. And I'm not saying it's just about government. Business needs to play its part as well. But I feel that if the relationship is strained between government and early years, you've got, we don't have enough spaces for a lot of these people that are coming through for the 15, 20 hours. If your child is already in a nursery, then that's fine. But there's no available spaces. I deal with parents who are waiting a couple of months to get a space.
Oh, I feel you, yeah. As soon as we knew that the date of birth, roughly the date of birth of our child was that, we tried to get the nursery. It took us months. You're totally... And it was even before the the 2-3 years,
Yeah.
situation. I can only imagine how much tougher it is now.
Yeah, so I deal with, in particular, I've got about 4 parents at the moment who are economically active, want to work, want to increase their hours, but there's no space for them to do it because there's no spaces within the nursery setting. And the numbers coming through Highlands aren't great either. So we're not getting that trend of people coming through that want to go into the earlier setting because, let's be honest, you know what I mean? Incredibly rewarding, but really hard work. And, that's where you kind of look at like the benefits that you get in finance with healthcare and pension and things like that. But we don't get it in these care industries. And you kind of think you're more inclined to get ill. You're more inclined to, to pick up a bug from a child and get ill, or, someone working in a nursing home. You're more inclined to get ill in these environments than you probably are sitting in an office. And I feel that we probably just need to have a complete overhaul and a roadmap and a 10-year strategy for what early years will look like. But we need to have government and we need to have, the heads of all the nurseries talking to each other and have strong relationships in place. So I am looking forward to the elections and kind of seeing whether, we can get some strong candidates in that are willing to kind of take on these challenges that the economy is facing.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably a good time to request things, now around elections as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of promises. There is a lot of...
It's a tricky one because, I'm a big fan of a lot of people in politics, and I think that, for the people that go in, the salaries aren't great, and I think that they're under a lot of public scrutiny. And I think that I'm very much about increasing the salaries, get a better caliber person in there with business acumen or with experience in the industries that they are representing. And I would happily, if people were saying there was an increase in tax to accommodate that, as someone who's always paid tax on the island.
If we're getting the right people in, absolutely, they're deciding your life, more or less.
That are making the right decisions. And I think that when we're asking people to represent us for the money that they get, and then the scrutiny they're under, like the abuse they get on social media, you're constantly like the media in your case, and I think that sometimes it's just not kind at all. And it's really like we've kind of lost that whole thing where we teach our children about like healthy debate and someone can disagree with you and you can still be friends, but as adults we don't practice that. And I feel that we expect our politicians to be this, to work like they're on 200 grand salaries, and and they don't get PR training, they don't get development into them roles, and they're just pushed out there into the media. And I don't always agree with some of the politicians' decisions, but we're very, very lucky over here that we can access, like you can email them, ask them for coffee, and try and understand their way of thinking.
And it's hard for them to hide from you. That's
exactly.
For sure.
But in my experience, there's not one of them I've met that won't meet you for coffee or won't kind of speak to you or won't give you, or like try and speak to you and to make you understand about, they're in that position. And I don't really feel they have to, but I haven't come across one that doesn't. And I think that says a lot, because if you look at in Ireland or the UK or I'm sure Romania, you don't have the access to your politicians.
No.
So we're incredibly lucky, and we probably take that for granted, that we, the roles they play. And like I said, I'm very happy to challenge them, and I'm sure they don't agree a lot with what I say, but I really admire anyone that does that, because I think it takes real courage to go into them roles. But they definitely need to be looked after and supported better and paid a lot bigger salaries, in my view.
I mentioned earlier about the change from 6 weeks to 12 weeks parental leave, and, the social media reaction, let's say 50-50. What's your answer to the skeptics? The businesses that probably are not willing to offer this support, that you think that is needed. Maybe parts of the government that they feel like, just get on with life, it's tough, make it happen. I know we touch along the way, but is there something like quite specific that they're missing out, by having these perceptions or ideas?
Probably need to speak to wonderful people like Fiona Brennan at Brighter Futures, who deal with any given time 150 parents. A majority of these parents will be working parents. Go and sit up there and have a conversations, ask them parents to come into the room and hear these real stories. And these are not people that are scroungers or asking for handouts. These are people that are really, really struggling. Middle earners that are, need support. We have a high percentage of single parents on the island, blended families. I think it's about inevitably having conversations with people and starting by looking at a case-by-case situation, sitting with people within your organisation if you're a small employer and asking, what does support look like for you? bringing the human element back into it. We're in a world of AI, and I think that, it's great that we're looking at training and development and talking about productivity, but a majority of businesses are people businesses. We need client relations. We need people to run a care industry. We need people in care roles. We need them soft skills. We're kind of pushing people into making decisions making dishonest decisions by, putting fake meetings in their calendar, or, pretending, they're sick so they can pick up a child. So we're forcing people into taking this time anyway, because their child will always come first.
Yeah.
But the culture will not always be honest, because you're forcing a parent, and I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but when you feel that you can't have these conversations with your employer and you're worried about your job or you're worried about promotion, then it forces people into decisions sometimes they don't want to make. And that's the culture we're creating.
You're totally right. The child will come first, and in a way or another, no matter the industry, the parents will find a way. It's the way nature. It's the way nature works, right?
Exactly.
I remember quite well having a conversation with one of my colleagues from years back, and he was saying, "Look, I just had to take off sick. I've got to stay with my child." And I'm like, that's tough, man. It's really is, And if you were to, I guess coming back to, because this is a male, a father, and coming back to fathers, not having sometimes not having the strength, sometimes the business is not supporting fathers, to go that route. I think that's a real issue, because you almost going back to feeling almost like a weak person, if you're going to ask for, I need to stay with my child for 2 days, but it's just taking a different route, saying that, I'm off sick, I can't do this because for whatever reason. So it's tough I do feel like it's tough for parents on both sides, and there is maybe more support, although not enough, for females, but then the males part, either because they don't want to integrate into that system, or the businesses are not understanding enough the situation. I feel like that's coming from both sides.
No, I totally agree. And I think that's the reason Mentorhood was born. And I set it up so with the name Mentorhood is in from the mentoring aspect, but it's a take on manhood and motherhood. Mm-hmm. And I think that, we've had men at the workshops. It's not exclusive to females. And I think that the support network is there. And you've got, Matt Falla, who runs Man Club. You've got wonderful organisations on the island that do wonderful work, and they acknowledge that space, that there's, that men need to be able to open up, men need to be able to talk. And I think that, if you've got, look at the percentage of people we have that are, single parents or divorce levels on the island, and look at the period of a child's life for them first few years when couples break up. It's an immensely tough period. And if you throw in an unsupportive employer and an environment where you've got a male who can't ask for that support or can't ask for that help or can't talk to a male colleague about it, it's such an isolating period for a man. And I agree with you. I think there does need to be more support, and we're very exclusive in relation to that as well. And we always said that, and that's the reason I didn't want to pigeonhole it just for parents. It's parents in general. And I understand that some parents, I was dealing with a couple of weeks ago, dealing with a dad who's bringing up his two daughters. And I think that, parenthood is very different now. You know what I mean? It's not like your typical man and woman bringing up children. And I think that we need to be open-minded to that as well. And I think it's about ensuring that we are supporting these groups that do support parents. We've got a situation on the island where we're so backed by a charity sector that do immense work on the island, but then we only really tell them what their budgets are for the following year in December, and then we expect them to be able to pay their staff on goodwill. Like, no business would work like that. When I ran businesses, if we found out what our budget was in December, our doors would be closed.
It's got to be predictable.
Exactly. So these 3 years rolling kind of budgets make sense, because you don't expect a business to run like that. But we're saying to charities, we need you to be more commercial. We need you to do more fundraising. We need you to, go and ask for more support. We need you to run it like a business. But then we'll tell you what your budget is, your grant from government is in December. And it's shocking, because a lot of the services that they offer are from government. Government will come to them and say, well, we want you to offer this service now. We want you to do this. And, we'll obviously give you the funding to do that. But, it's it supports the island so much, these charities. It supports families. it supports, so many people in different situations. And I don't think we acknowledge the value of that. And until we move on to the support that charities need, that support, dads and mums and anybody who kind of needs that support. I think that, it's shocking, really.
Yeah, I have more and more conversations with charities recently. One of them that, works with us in having their own podcast, James Ark, and he's supporting fathers, in struggling times. And it's crazy the amount of people he helps. And sometimes because you've not been through those situations, or I don't know, friends that have been through those situations, kind of detached from it, and you just don't feel like don't see the bigger picture. And he was mentioning, I can't remember how many hundreds, I think, in a year. And I'm like, that's crazy. That's a lot. That means, hundreds of problems for each one of those families. I'm like, he's basically doing most of the part that in some cases, I guess, in other countries, in the bigger infrastructures, the government would do, but he's taking that on himself. So it must be quite tough. And I think this is almost like an extension of what the government does, or if government does anything in certain areas. And there's a lot of pressure on these people to deliver it. And if, as you were saying, if you only get your budget, is it like that? Is it December for the coming year? That's crazy. That's
really... So you find out mid-December with I think you obviously have the conversations and people have confidence through a period of time, but you have to send a lot of information to say that we're hitting these targets.
Some of these help, it's longer than just a week or two. So if, let's say, you have people that you're already engaging with, and you're getting a slap in December saying that, it's 50% less than it was last year for whatever reason, then what? You just feel like you're going to leave these people. Are you going to leave these people behind? Like, what's the plan?
Well, we want to encourage, a younger generation to come through to the charity sector. We want to, the next generation of CEOs that are going to be running these charities, and that do wonderful volunteers. We want to encourage more people to work within that sector.
Yeah.
But the model needs to change. The infrastructure within that model needs to change. And like I say, I always go back to business. If we were told that, well, this is your budget, but we'll only tell you kind of exactly what you get in December, then you can't open your doors. You can't commit to your staff you're going to pay them for the next term. I would be telling my team, go look for a different job with more security. They all have families. You'll all have, inevitably someone is in a care role, or they will give a care role, or you'll need a care role at some stage. So care is incredibly important. And I think that, majority of people who have dependents, you can't be reliant on, if it's just you alone, I suppose you can make more informed decisions. But when you've got people that rely on you, you need to know kind of what salary you're getting, and you need to know you have a secure job, and you have your healthcare and all these things that are important. But we don't seem to allow the charities to run like that, which I find bizarre, really.
I can't remember exactly what was the number of charities on the island, but it's in 200, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, it's an incredible amount of charities on the island, and growing. And I think that we've opened another food bank. We're kind of, so there's a growing demand for services, and services are stretched. Really, really stretched. I meet with charity heads quite regularly, and they're incredibly stretched. And it's like this year is going to be a very interesting year because, like I say, when middle earners are struggling, you have to imagine what people who are in lower incomes, what's happening with them, and then people that are falling through the cracks. And I think it's very short-sighted to not support the charities more and let them know kind of what their funding is, what support they need, and the stipulations that they have to follow to get their funding as well. I think it just, in my view, I know the Chief Minister has come out this week and said that he's in agreement of the 3-year kind of funding. So I really hope something changes with that.
But do you think there's something to be said about making sure that these, whatever hundreds of charities we've got, they're all doing their job properly as well? I'm almost presuming like the devil's advocate, that some, are getting the money, but, almost like getting the money from this pot that could be distributed in a better place, but they're not doing what they should be doing, or it's not their cause, it might not be as relevant. If there's something like that as well, without giving names, do you think?
I think the information needs to be from government. I think government needs to be asking the right questions in relation to who they're funding. And I feel that I know this from and I won't name names,
Yeah.
friends that are charity heads, that sometimes they are sat in that room and they won't be asked a question about who have you supported. They won't be asked the basic questions of like what's the level of people you supported, what's the outcome. They won't be asked them basic questions in relation to that before funding hits. And I think that them questions need to be asked. And I think probably I think they're heavily scrutinized in relation to different areas. But I think that they're probably not asking the right questions in relation to who they're funding and the amount they're funding as well. It'd be interesting for you to do a podcast with a couple of the CEOs from charities, and I'm sure you'd get some very interesting stats on that and some information on that. I just know how incredibly hard they're stretched. Mentorhood has been a brainchild for 7 years, but we've only really been operating 6 months, and the quantity of stuff that we're dealing with already, and we're not registered charity, we're not for profit. And the reason I didn't want to register as a charity was because the charities on the island do such wonderful work, and I can tap into the charities for support where I need it, because they're always very helpful and very open-minded to supporting parents. So I think that it's great that we can do that, and that's the reason I didn't want to set it up to be taken a part of that funding that the charities on the island really need.
Yeah, if Mentorhood is successful, how is the Jersey workforce, or how is Jersey looking in 10 years? How do you see it? I'm sure you probably have some sort of
I have my dreams.
Dreams, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm definitely.
You've got to when you are, I think, in this.
I'm a dreamer, but I'm a realist as well,
Yes.
and I feel that I think that if we can create a culture that is family friendly, like I would love to see what they have in the UK. We have a family friendly charter. Where businesses go through this, screening for how family friendly you are. They get their stats in relation to that. They work with a specialist that we work with from Working Families in the UK who, has a 90% success rate. So when we look at the cases that will go to tribunal or the cases that will go to JACs, she's the kind of middle person before that happens. So with a 90% success rate, and the population in the UK, she works heavily with the Labour government and with different charities and with different organisations like BNP and Lloyds Bank. So she's, a credible person. I feel that, if people go through the screening and then they go through the work that Jane can do, then they can get to where they need to be in relation to, and it's for a minimal amount of money that they can do this. Then we can create better family-friendly cultures. We can train line managers in relation to family-friendly. We can normalize CEOs, like I said, taking time off and, creating that culture, embrace the idea of job shares or job design and, hybrid working, and just be more open-minded to that, to look at your skill level that we have on Ireland. And we need to be really, really careful with the skill level we have because we've such a small population here. So ideally, family-friendly charter will be one side of it. More support from corporates. So I think that, a lot of corporate businesses will give a certain amount of money to charities and will do work within the charity, and some of it is wonderful and some of it is really from the heart, but some of it is PR as well to make the business look good. So I think that I was very shocked to learn that the amount of money that corporate kind of give to the charity sector on the island. So I think that's a really, really small percentage, and I think that could change. I think that you could kind of look within your budgets, what the economic side of that as well, and I think going back to supporting economic, development for parents and things like that. If we can upskill people, I'm very much about closing the gender pay gap as well. And I think that the gender pay gap starts when women have children generally at the age of 35, and women never really catch up in relation to that. So I'm all about trying to empower and upskill parents to ensure that they don't stay stagnant in their careers and they can develop. So we are obviously working with providers. So I suppose a more economically active workforce, parents that don't feel that they need to work, or people in a care home that don't feel they need to work multiple jobs to survive on the island, a family-friendly charter that supports, people at work, and that when people are looking to leave an employer, they can go online and they can see who are the family-friendly employers, and government to play their part. I think it's a good time now. People are making a lot of promises, but I feel that government need to stand up and say, okay, well, 15 to 20 hours is a start, but what's the next plan? And where's the clear roadmap for early years, and where's the support for these wonderful people that work within our nursery settings, that look after our children, that develop our children? Let's see firsthand the problems, the stressed parents, and maybe the economic issues, the modern day poverty that's happening, that they spot a lot of these things and they spend a lot of time with our children. So I think that more support is needed for them as well. So I suppose to create that culture where care is infrastructure, that would be a big thing for me, and look at the importance of early years on the island and how the first 3 years of a child's life can impact the rest of their life, to see the importance of that. So yeah, it's a big dream, but we're going to chip away at this and see how things go.
Yeah, that's a strong one. Yeah, with the first 3 years of the child life, I feel you with that, because we're trying to be as present as possible in our daughter's life now, because we know and we see her, like we're doing things, and she picks up, just by copying, almost like what you do. And I'm like, if I'm not there, she wouldn't know how to do that, but I want to be present, and it is difficult. I agree. Yeah, I'm lucky. My wife is lucky. We're in a good place in terms of like having support from our employers, but not everybody's in the same boat. Now, Denise, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to join your cause, if they need help, where do they find you?
So you can find us on Mentorhood. So our email is mentorhoodjersey@gmail.com. I'm pretty visible, so contact me on LinkedIn, social media. We do have a Mentorhood page, which we can link you into the WhatsApp group. So between the two pages, we have 200 parents that we support, which is growing every day. And I think that it's the support networks that have formed as well. It's like, we talk a lot about, I talk a lot about the village. I grew up where it was like 100 houses, and you could throw your ball outside and the kids would all play together, and the parents would be in the window kind of washing the dishes. But we don't have the village anymore. We don't have the village to bring up our children because we're so multicultural. People don't necessarily have grandparents or support here. We're trying to build that support network. We're trying to set up kind of more meetups for parents. And, already through the workshop, we've seen how people have connected. And I think from the feedback forums, that's been a big thing about the connection people have formed. So we're trying to build, as much as we're trying to do the upskilling and the holistic, we're trying to do the holistic side as well, by ensuring parents have support. And, maybe that'll lead to, support with drop-offs or pickups, or childcare and bits and pieces. And I think that we're just trying to create that village again and that support network for people.
Yeah, it takes a village to raise a child, right? Yeah. That's what they say, right?
Definitely, I'm a big believer in that.
Denise, it was a great conversation, eye-opener, because for people that are struggling with what you do, they're not alone. So they can get support. You can guide them in the right places, and it's great that you're working with other charities, so you collectively trying to make this happen.
And I like, Yvonne Corbin and Karen Cooks and, Fiona Vatcher at Childcare Trust, like they've been incredible mentors for me, and like Fiona Brennan at Brighter Futures, which I've mentioned. I think in particular, I'm due to meet Claire at Brightly, who I believe does wonderful work as well. And Rosemary at Family Nursing. And I think that, these charities do incredible work with families, and I don't claim to be an expert. I always said that, I come from running businesses. I'm a mother and I work in recruitment, and I'm trying to retrain as mediators so we can create a world where we can healthily debate things. But I think that it's important that people, do reach out. You know what I mean? I think I'm very approachable. I'm a mum. I'll happily tell you about my struggles, and this picture perfect Instagram life that people create is just not true. And I think that, the realities of parenting is tough. It's wonderful, it's rewarding, but it's tough. And, just reach out, because we will offer support where we can, or we will signpost you in the right direction.
Yeah. Who's from the private sector? We want to give them a shout out that joining you in this journey or help you along the way. Is there anybody that probably supported you so far, that they see value in what you do?
Yeah, so we've had IOD, which have been incredible. Okay. So Alex Ruddy and Lynn Cleary, Lynn in particular, a mum, incredible professional. She's been wonderful. We've had loads of support from them in relation to getting this event up and running, to get the right people in the room to have the conversations going. Sir Mark Bollier, Policy Centre, really informative, really approachable, very honest about where he didn't know the information, spoke to everybody who does have that information, and he's done some wonderful work for us as well. We also, HSBC, so they have got involved with sponsoring the event we're doing with the IOD, and they fly the flag as a family-friendly employer. Obviously, they're a bigger employer, but we want to look at ways that we can support the small and medium-sized employers. Because I think that, there are, quick wins that don't cost anything that you can implement within your business. So we want to try and support them where possible. Because we've, like I said, we've such an economically active workforce that of people that are in a care role. So they've been wonderful. And I know some good businesses that are doing it, that are really, really, really proactive in that space. I'm sure, I meet people a lot for coffees and for connections as well. And there's some wonderful people that are, wonderful businesses that want to get involved working with us this year, which were, Vicky Milner at Viberts. She's not a parent, so she's been a good sounding board for me to tell me, why it won't work. And I need that, you know what I mean? So she's been brilliant in relation to saying to me why it won't work and stress test everything I'm trying to do. Yeah. And it's important to have people like that. And Mark's the same, he's very good at telling me, well, why would business listen to you, and why should they do this and why should they do that? So you need people like that around you as well that will stress test what you're saying. Because if people just tell you you're wonderful and everything's great, then you can't progress. And I think this year for us is very much, we've done a roadmap on what we want to achieve this year. And I'm working quite a lot with Leslie Morant, who set up the Gender Pay Gap Group. And she does wonderful work in transformational side of parenting. She's a career coach as well. So I'm doing some work with her, and she's come on board with us with Mentorhood. Yeah. So it's it's exciting times because we're growing. We've got all these specialists that are happy to work with us.
You're bringing all these people together, from all areas.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't pretend to be an expert, but I'm very good at connecting people, and I'm very good at, I think it's probably the Irish in me. You're you don't take no for an answer, and you kind of say, I have no budget, I have no money, but can you support
I'll still make it happen.
And I know it's an important issue, and I know that a lot of people are in this situation as well. And like I said, in general, I've had positive experiences with government. I know we give them quite a hard time, and and I think that, like I said,
you got to aim high at least too.
Exactly. I know in the initial stages, I had a lot of great conversations with government in relation to that. They acknowledge it's a problem, and a lot of people in there want to help. And I think the culture in there sometimes doesn't allow that. Sometimes it is a popularity contest, and the proposals that are pushed through are if you like the person rather than if it's a good proposal. And I think that we need to change that. But we need to encourage, more people need to vote. More people need to. It's great to be on social media and comment on, what they're doing, but have you voted? And we kind of, the statistics are that people our age aren't great at voting, and you kind of think that we do need more people to vote. If you want to have your say, your vote does make a difference. And I'm not getting paid by Vote.ie to say this, but I just know the importance of voting and how more than ever we want to see some good people in politics, and I think that it's so important to get your vote in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, shout out to all the organization, all the people that supported you so far, and to hopefully the ones that are coming along the way. Denise, was a great conversation. I'm sure we could go for hours. It's a very deep subject, and it requires a lot of attention. I start kind of getting into this because of my daughter now, and I understand the challenges, but it's a lot to it, and hopefully we'll get you back when you have more positives responses,
definitely.
And this will evolve into something even bigger.
And like I said, when you see the transformation of two parents in particular who are single parents that we've managed to get into really good jobs through going through our workshops, and then they're in mid-level admin roles where they're on 20 grand, 25 grand a year, and they've moved into roles where they're on 50 grand a year, and the impact that's had for their family. I think that's where I see the value, and I see the needs. And I always said that if we weren't getting people signed up for the workshops, if we didn't have a waiting list of people that want to attend our next workshops, and I didn't see the demand was there, I would stop. But I know the demand is there, and I know the impact I can have by funnel it back into the work I do in recruitment. And I think that's really important as well, that there is an avenue that you don't need to stay in that job, and you don't need to be in that culture that doesn't support you in your care role, because you're never going to choose between your work and your child. It's just a no-brainer, and I think that's really important for parents to remember. And please reach out, because I'll always meet you for a coffee, and if I can't support you, I'll put you in the right direction for support.
Amazing. Yeah, I hope that people are listening, and if they feel like they need help, they get in touch with you and get the right support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful.